So just so you all have a sense of what we're doing here together, I think most of you know, this webinar is hosted by HEAL Food Alliance. HEAL is organizing in a few different ways. One of them is trying to build our political leadership so that we have folks in governance who actually are accountable to our communities. Another way that we're organizing is building power in local communities and trying to get policies passed in several communities simultaneously through some translocal organizing work. And the third area that we focus on is addressing corporate control of our food system. And so this webinar is hosted by our corporate work area that's really looking at how do we end the stranglehold that these corporations have on our food system and on our lives. And as we've been looking at what are some of the pillars that undergird their control of our systems, we know that the monopoly or monospony that they have over our systems is part of what makes it possible for them to control what happens in our communities, with workers, with farmers, with the land, and in terms of our environment. So we're taking this opportunity right now to hear from a couple of folks who are organizing to address one of the corporations that is pretty much emblematic of that kind of stranglehold on our food system. So looking specifically at Tyson as a corporation that's doing that. And during this call, we'll hear from David Muraskin and from Magaly Licolli, and I'll introduce them both in advance of their presentations. For HEAL in general, our goal is to build our collective power to be able to make the kind of transformative change that we want. And as we look at what's happening with our food system and the systems that we live in, we know that we want to move away from a system where profit is considered more valuable than people on the planet, and we want to move towards having control of our own lives, of our own labor, and being in right relationship with the land and with each other. So HEAL's goal is to build a multi-sector alliance, build our collective power with a justice-based leadership and a multi-sector approach so that we can get at this together. And we know that we need a division of labor to do this. So part of our goal with this webinar too is to hear from a couple of different ways that people are approaching this issue, and specifically the corporation of Tyson. So that's a little bit about HEAL and why we're hosting this webinar. And this will all feed into some of the collective work that we take on together. So if you are interested in learning more about that or joining our corporate work area, you can get in touch with us after this webinar as well. And again, feel free to add any thoughts, any questions, anything that you want to share in the chat box. We're glad to have you all with us. So I'll start off by introducing David Muraskin, who is a public health and safety attorney at Public Justice. And David focuses on Public Justice's efforts to promote sustainable animal farming, agriculture, and to hold factory farms accountable to the negative social and environmental effects of their production methods. Prior to joining Public Justice, he worked on a variety of consumer litigation cases, first as a fellow and with Public Citizen, and then as an attorney in a whistleblower practice. And he's represented clients in cases from state trial courts on the United States Supreme Court concerning constitutional and statutory claims. We're really glad to have him with us. I first met David through the Animal Agriculture Reform Collaborative and was instantly impressed by his creativity and his openness and his focus. And really looking forward to hearing from him and the work that he and Public Justice are doing together to address how Tyson is impacting farmers specifically. So David, I'll turn it over to you. And again, for anyone who's just joined us, if you could go ahead and mute yourself, that'll make it easier for David.
Well, first, thanks so much for having me. My screen's sharing for you all, right? Is that correct? Great. So really appreciate you guys having me. I'm wonderful to be invited. I'm very excited to hear what Magaly has to say, because workers work and workers' rights is an area we're looking to expand into. Public Justice is a national nonprofit. We focus on litigation as a way to promote change, but we also very much recognize that litigation is a tool in the toolbox. It's not a end unto itself. And so really are interested in partnering with groups, both organizing on the ground and in working to do legislative and regulatory advocacy combined with litigation. But I am going to focus on our litigation efforts at the moment because that's what I can really bring to the table that is not just telling you all what you already know. While I think a lot of you have been working on focusing on the workers in the plants and in the houses, one of the ways we've been trying to attack Tyson from a litigation perspective is looking at structures. And this first slide that you see up is actually the chicken industry's itself articulation of its own structure. I actually think it may be a little bit under-aggressive in how much the chicken industry and the chicken integrators own as part of the process. So for instance, it says things like the rendering plant are not under their control. In our Tyson case, we know for a fact that meat that doesn't go to consumers ends up in a Tyson-owned dog food processing plant. So in fact, I think this is a little bit less comprehensive than it might be. But what I'm hoping you'll take away from this slide is that really everything from a growing perspective, from a farmer perspective, is owned by Tyson except for the actual house in which the chickens are raised. So the chicken comes from a hatchery that Tyson owns. It is transported on a Tyson truck. It is fed with feed that Tyson regulates and produces, and then ends up going to a Tyson processing plant. And let me see. There we go. And the only thing that the grower owns is this house in which the chickens are allowed to live for a given amount of time. And what's important about this slide is not just that these houses are huge and lead to confinement, certainly areas of concern, but from a grower perspective, these houses are very specific and very complicated. So they're incredibly expensive to build. We're looking at hundreds of thousands of dollars in the kind of up-to-date houses, and most growers don't just own one house at a time for economic reasons. And they're organized around very specific rules and requirements that are integrator unique. So different integrators will have rules about whether you can have a box heater or a circular heater. They'll have different rules about what kind of drink system the chickens are drinking out of, whether they're nipples or cups, how many fans there are in a house and how they're placed. And this requires growers to take out very specific contracts to build a house for Tyson or for Purdue. You know, this is not Tyson specific, although we are litigating against Tyson. And at the same time, growers are not paid based on what they actually turn over to Tyson. This isn't a simple, you grow a chicken to X weight and you're paid X, Y dollars a pound. This is the formula that you're seeing on the screen that the companies use. It's called the tournament system to determine how the growers are actually paid. And what's notable here is that a lot of these factors, and I won't walk you through all the different elements of the formula, but just kind of call out a few, is that a lot of these factors are driven by the inputs that we established in the first slide, Tyson controls. So for instance, the livability percentage is the amount of chicks that survive to adulthood. That is in large part going to be determined by the Tyson specific genes and Tyson raising of the birds in the hatchery, not the actual grower's conduct. Or feed conversion, which is the fourth or fifth column, is about how much feed it takes to generate a pound of chicken as an end product. As I mentioned at the beginning, feed is something that is regulated by Tyson, is determined by Tyson, is formulated by Tyson. This is something largely out of the grower's control. And so what you actually see when you look at payments is that this is the payments for an individual grower, they're all over the map. What you would expect to see in a system that's based on individual effort or input or efficiency, depending on how you wanted to characterize it, is a pretty level set of payments over time for doing the same job, right? Each one of these flocks should be the same number of chicks raised for the same period of time, delivered to the same company. But what you instead see is that their payments are just wildly disparate. And that really suggests to us and to lots of other people that something weird is going on here. And what we heard when we went out and interviewed growers is that what you're seeing is a great manipulation by Tyson of the inputs, which then affects how they stack up in how the growers stack up in the tournaments and their payments. So what will happen is that specific growers will get chicks that have spent more time at the hatchery than others. And time at the hatchery is greatly correlated, if not not more connected with death or livability of the chicks, because the chickens typically do not get enough water at the hatchery. So if you spend overnight at the hatchery versus being delivered immediately after you hatch, you're much less likely to survive. Growers will get different feeds. So growers describe that they receive the wrong feed at the wrong times, or even contaminated feed, and they'll be put into a tournament with growers who receive better quality feed. And part of the tournament, which I mentioned earlier, is it's not just what Tyson provides, but how you compare to other growers in a given week. A potentially particular interest to people on this call and in the community, right? Tyson made this big deal about going antibiotic free. Even after that announcement came out, what we were hearing from growers is that certain growers were still getting antibiotics, which allows their chickens to grow much faster with less feed, have a better score in the tournament, and others were not. Tyson was coming in and saying that these were medically necessary antibiotics, even after the agreement to go antibiotic free, and we're giving it the same way that they were before the agreement to go antibiotic free. They were simply pumping in antibiotics writ large to a house and just denying it to certain other growers. And this is where you get this kind of sense of being in a trap, because the other thing we were hearing is that Tyson will change the inputs for growers as you approach a specific end date to your contract. And what the argument Tyson then uses is, well, if you want to get better inputs, you need to build a new house. You need to take out new debt. You need to update what you have. And so it uses its control over the inputs to keep growers trapped in this cycle where they're always in debt, always have to remain growers, can never leave the company, can never advance their livelihood. We also, for what it's worth, to not just hear this was a way of kind of financial capture or kind of creating a sharecropping relationship, as it's been called, but also just a way of kind of punishing people. If you complain, if you are disliked, you don't get along with your boss, you get worse inputs and your outcome is manipulated. So what are we doing about this? There's this very appealing statute called the Packers and Stockyards Act. It's an agriculture-specific statute, and it seems to speak exactly to what we're talking about. It regulates unfair, unjust practices in the industry, unreasonable preferences or advantages. There's a reason you haven't heard a lot about this statute, however, which is that it's been given this gloss by the courts of being much, much more stringent than it sounds. Essentially, what the courts have said is this is an agriculture-specific antitrust statute. So while unfairness might be the language in the statute, what you actually need to show is an injury to competition in a broad economic sense, that the company is using its unfair, inappropriate economic leverage in a way that injures the growers. And so this becomes a much more challenging suit to bring. And one of the reasons that the Packers and Stockyards Act has not been used to regulate the companies in a way that it might seem natural to, given what we all know about the industry. Nonetheless, we at Public Justice, and working with a couple of member firms of Public Justice, we're funded by a variety of law firms who are interested in this work, have been trying to reinvigorate Packers and Stockyards Act litigation. And our theory in this case, and we're bringing this case in Kentucky, is that Tyson, at least in most instances, and most agricultural, most integrators rather, have anti-competitive power. That when you look at where the integrators are around the country, they are separated enough so that growers can't move between integrators. You can only economically transport chicken about 50 or 60 miles from the farm in which it's raised to the slaughter facility, or else between gas and death and transport, it becomes totally economically not viable. And you'll see that most slaughterhouses are more than 50 or 60-mile radius apart. And so as a result, you're trapped in this relationship with Tyson. Once you build a house, you cannot actually get out of it. That's what's called a monopsony. You probably have heard a lot about monopolies. Monopsonies are just the flip side, that there's only one buyer. In this case, Tyson is the only buyer for the services or goods which these growers are making. We also have an argument that even where the integrators are competing with one another, they're both within the 50 or 60-mile radius, that what's happening is the integrators are coming up with deals not to take growers from one another. And so even if you could conceivably move in a very abstract sense, you can't actually practically move. And then we're trying to combine this with those unfair practices that I described to you earlier, the notion that Tyson manipulates the feed quality, the chicks, the other inputs, and saying that that violates the Packers and Stockyards Act. And that's our theory, and our goal is to try to put pressure on Tyson to change its conduct with the growers. And I want to, the last two bullet points are going to come back in the next slide. I want to kind of talk about them collectively. The other legal theory that we're operating on is a kind of a more classic antitrust theory, which is that this agreement not by the integrators not to work against one another, to have growers compete for or move between the integrators, and the integrators compete for growers' services, in fact results from an agreement among the integrators not to do that. There's a database that we all know about called AgriStats, where the integrators share very detailed information, almost farm by farm information, about what's being produced, which we think allows the integrators to ensure that they're not actually competing with one another for the work of growers. We also know, for instance, that the integrators, including Tyson, go and visit one another's plants to look at how they're operating. And so that's something you don't typically see when there's actual competition between companies that are potentially producing the same product. So that's very peculiar. And we see, most notably for the purposes of this discussion, we see parallel movements. So Tyson changes the type of heater that it has in its house, and it ensures that that heater is not the same as Purdue, or not the same as another company. And then Purdue similarly switches the type of heater, but again, it's not the same as Tyson. They're constantly making it so that there's a great deal of cost input for a grower to move. They essentially have to build a different house. And our argument is that this too amounts to anti-competitive conduct that harms the growers. And this is another way in which we can say that the treatment of the growers, this kind of corporate control system that is both at Tyson and among the integrators, is unlawful. All that being said, and both of these cases are still being in litigation, we don't have a result yet, I do want to highlight the kind of benefits and pitfalls of this. And it's something that we here talk about very often and are certainly very conscious of in our work. There's a way in which this work can be argued to say the growers need to get better pay, better treatment, that they shouldn't be trapped in the system of Tyson. That's certainly how we try to present this work, and we think that's a compelling way to present this work and an important voice to add to this discussion. We think that that kind of litigation argument and the evidence we gather can go to a discussion like the one that's been happening in Kansas about whether communities really want these facilities in their backyards, whether these promised jobs and building of farms is really something that is actually true, or whether the money really ends up just back in the pockets of the corporation. One thing we are very sensitive about, though, is that these cases are typically framed as harms to consumers, that when you talk about anti-competitive conduct, what you typically end up hearing courts saying, and the legal arguments being that, well, consumers are paying too much for their chicken, or too much for their good. And in that instance, this is a case that really has the potential to be manipulated by the other side, and something we try to keep an eye on. That I think we all agree on these calls that the food should not be cheaper. We should not be squeezing more money out of the people in the process to give it to consumers, give consumers a lower end good. And sometimes these cases can give that kind of aura to them. So we try to, one of the reasons the Sherman Act case here is being brought on behalf of growers rather than consumers is specifically to avoid that narrative. But as you talk about this and as you talk about anti-competitive conduct, I just want to kind of flag this as something that we are certainly mindful of as an issue. That being said, we do think in the ideal world, the outcome of this is a reform for how the growers are treated and potentially a take on a way to dismantle the tournament system. So it's no longer, you as a farmer, you're no longer at the whim of the company, and then you can get out of these contracts if you desire, potentially get more competition and more variety into the food system so that there are different options than having to buy from these integrators.
Thanks so much, David, for sharing all of that. And I know that there are a couple of questions that have come in already for you. I think that the big one that I'm going to ask you about, if you want to think about while Magaly is talking, is how to talk a little bit more, first of all, about how the farmers are pitted against each other right now, and how you've gotten them to work together and come together in this suit. Would be great to hear about after we hear from Magaly. So let me transition to her slides. And while I'm doing that, I'll just make a quick introduction of Magaly. She is the Executive Director of the Northwest Arkansas Worker Justice Center. She is also a founding member of the Incarcerated Workers Committee in Arkansas and the Northwest Arkansas Industrial Workers of the World. In 2013, she graduated from the University of Arkansas with a major in drama, and she began her theater career in Mexico with emphasis in social justice. She enjoys living in the South mostly because she believes that the organizing work there with the immigrant community is crucial and necessary. She is a leader not only in her own community, but she's also working nationally on the board of the Food Chain Workers Alliance and as a member of HEAL Steering Council, where she brings a lot of dedication and her perspective to the work with a great sense of humor as well. So Magaly, I'll turn it over to you. Let me make sure that you're not muted, so that you can share a little bit with us too. And again, if you have any other questions lingering for David, feel free to type them in the chat box. And as Magaly is talking, write any there for her as well.
Thank you so much, Navina, for inviting me to be part of this webinar. I'm very excited to share what we do here in the Northwest Arkansas with all of you. Thank you, Dave, for your input. It was really shocking but not surprising, because we know how these companies work and overall in all the aspects of it. Well, I want to share a little bit about the political context here in the Northwest, so for you to have an idea. In Arkansas, well, as you all know, we are in the South, and it's a right-to-work state, which that makes it very difficult to organize. But also, we are a corporate state dominated by Walmart and Tyson Foods. What they do is they provide so much money to the community, churches, nonprofits, schools, universities, and so it makes it really hard for us to gain allies because all of them are tied to Tyson or Walmart in somehow. So in the South, organizing workers, it means that you are being labeled as radical and communist sometimes. But we are trying to change that narrative. Now, in the Northwest Arkansas, the Latino immigration began some decades ago because Tyson was recruiting Mexican workers, and they brought them here illegally. Then after that, they will bring in workers more from California. So a lot of people that we have here come from California because they also were paying workers to bring their families, to bring their friends. And so that's how the community, the Latino community, start growing up here. We also have the Marshallese community. They come from the Marshall Islands, so they should be labeled as refugees, but the U.S. government, after tasting bombs in their islands, they just give them the work permit to come here. So they brought them here to Springdale, and this is where the majority of Marshallese live in the U.S. So those are the ethnicities that we see more in the poultry plants in Tyson primarily, a lot of Marshallese and Latinos from Mexico and El Salvador primarily. we began organizing workers, or well, the organization began primarily doing advocacy, so taking case on wage theft, workers' comp, but then eventually we were getting a lot of cases of poultry workers. So the organization decided to do like the first step of the campaign was more about getting information and data. So the center interviewed 500 poultry workers across the state of Arkansas. And we also have been collaborating a lot with Oxfam America, releasing other reports. Our report, it's based on the Arkansas, and this is one, the wages and working conditions in Arkansas poultry plants, which is in our website, and you can take a look. It is very comprehensive, that talks about the wages, the bathroom breaks, the line speed, and all of that. Then eventually on the same year we did this report with Oxfam called No Relief, that talks about the bathroom breaks. One of the main issues that we see with the poultry workers is that they are not allowed to go to the bathroom as when they need. They have certain hours and certain minutes to go to the bathroom. So a lot of the workers opt out for using or wearing diapers. We see a lot of injured workers. A lot of our workers in the base are injured because of the line speed. They are processing now up to 45 chickens per minute, and that is a very conservative number. And we can assume that they will process around 21,000 chickens a day. And as I said, that is a very conservative number. It can be more than that. And so the repetitive motion causes a lot of long life injuries, and workers are often, whenever they get injured, they're often disposal and they get fired. And then after that, they are not protected by the laws. And as well, like if they have a workers' comp case, it's very difficult for them to find lawyers here that will fight against Tyson, because as I said, they control so much the community. So we have very few attorneys that will work with workers' comp cases. Many of them get, they succeed on the cases. Very few of them will succeed on the cases, and a lot of them will be left out with any help whatsoever. We have workers around on the age of 50 years old that can no longer work, and they still have families to feed and support. And so it is very heartbreaking to see these conditions of these workers here in Arkansas. And this doesn't only happen here in Arkansas. We have collaborated with other worker centers across the country that are also facing the same situation, and that is because of the mass production that they need to process more, and every year they are on risk of increasing the line speed on that. So we also see a lot of cases of wage theft as well, and also a lot of cases of discrimination and harassment, and primarily more among women. The majority of the women on the line, the majority of the workers on the line are women, and so that's why we have also created a women poultry committee, because they can talk about all of these things that they normally are afraid to speak up. I want to say that organizing poultry workers is very challenging, because most of them are very afraid to speak up. They are afraid of losing their jobs. The companies are located in rural areas, and they bring these workers from other countries, from other states, and they get locked up in these jobs. We see poultry workers going and moving within poultry companies. We have here Tyson, Cargill, George's, and other smaller plants. So we see them moving within the same industry, because they cannot have other jobs. So that is very strategically for these plants to be located in rural areas, because it's very difficult to move and to other jobs, and also it's very difficult to organize in the South. So we've been working with them about developing the leadership, the trust, the confidentiality for them to speak up. And so we have to be very creative here. about the techniques or the strategies that we use to organize workers. Last year, in 2016, whenever we released our first report, we also did the first time in the history of poultry workers in Arkansas stood up against Tyson outside the shareholders meeting, demanding better working conditions. Then eventually in May, we did another rally with Oxfam as well, and delivered more than 150,000 petitions to Tyson, demanding bathroom breaks. And that particular rally got so many media attention because of the report, the No Relief, talking about the bathroom breaks. And so that's how the consumer start worrying about their product, because they were not primarily worried because of the workers, but also because of the eat they consume was being processed under these conditions. So we had a lot of attention, and then Tyson changed a lot of their directors. They changed their CEO, and this year they released an agreement that they compromised to change the working conditions, and they put it on their website, and anyone can go and look it up. But we know as an organization that organizes workers that was a step, because then back in May in 2016, they were denying all the findings of the reports, were saying that the workers who were at the rallies were not Tyson workers. They actually released a statement saying that they didn't recognize that these workers were from Tyson. So then after that year also, they got a lot of OSHA citations. The U.S. Government Accountability Office also released reports backing up our reports. They came here to speak with the workers, and they realized that yes, these things happen also at Tyson. So eventually they changed all these directors and management, and they wanted to be more fair with the workers, more fair with the environment. But as I said, it was a step for them to recognize, but we know that that is not the end of what we want, because we know corporations are very smart and strategic about how they want to cover their image or protect their image. So we've been trying to developing ways with the workers now to see how we can monitoring as well with the help with the Poultry Coalition and Oxfam, to see how we can make sure that what they compromise is being true for the workers. So it's about a process of disseminating all of this agreement and see how that can be real for workers. And continue fighting and hold them accountable, because this is not the end. Another thing that I want to mention is that we are also in the process of launching this new campaign, the GFPP campaign, the Good Food Purchasing Policy, with the help with the Food Chain Workers Alliance. And so because, as I said, here in the community, we do not have a lot of people engaged in workers' justice. And so this campaign assures that we will be collaborating with people who are already working with environmental issues, like a lot of people in Fayetteville, Arkansas are fighting Tyson because of the contamination of the waters. A lot of people are also wanting to be more organic and supporting the farmers. So I think this is a great opportunity for us with this campaign to also incorporate labor, because whenever you go and talk about, or seeing people talking about the sustainability in the food system, they never mentioned labor on that. And so for us, it's been a lot about going and changing the narrative and say, if you're going to talk about that, we need to also talk about the people who are processing our food. And so they've been really receptive, because it was something that they never thought they could incorporate into these campaigns, and so we are a lot of people have been also been receptive on the GFPP campaign, and so we are we are hoping that this campaign will embrace more of the work that we do and to support more the poultry workers here in Arkansas.
Thanks so much, Magaly, for sharing. It's really great to hear about the ways that you all are organizing, and I definitely want to hear from you a little bit more after we have David answer that earlier question. Just hear from you a little bit more about how workers are coming together, especially to create, those alternatives like GFPP. So if anyone has any other additional questions for Magaly or for David, or if you all have questions for each other, feel free to put them in the box. But I'll turn it to Dave for a minute just to share your thoughts about the previous question. How are farmers pitted against it, and how are they organizing together? And then Magaly, you can talk about workers during that as well.
Sure, and I apologize. The tournament system can be a little bit complicated to wrap your head around. I might have sped through that a little bit. So there are really two axes to the tournament system. One is this formula that I mentioned that kind of computes a number or a kind of outcome of where you are, but then you're ranked against other growers who deliver in a particular week. Essentially, the company puts aside X amount of dollars to pay for chicken within that week, and they just ensure that if I do well in the tournament system, that money, the bonus I'm getting is coming out of the guy who does badly, not from the company. The company is not turning over extra money. And that's one of the reasons that the tournament system is so noxious and these manipulations are so noxious, is that the company can be assured by just choosing who actually gets to participate in the tournament that giving me bad food actually directly affects my outcome, because it doesn't just lower my score, but if they're giving the other guy who I'm competing against in the tournament system better food, it ensures that I will be dropped down, I will have a reduction in my paycheck, and it'll go to the other individual. And I think this actually helps from an organizing standpoint, because everyone's always a loser at some point. As I mentioned, as you get closer to the end of your contract, you get less good products, whether it be chicks or feed, and then someone else who's renewed their contract earlier gets something better, and you end up falling down in the tournament system. And this becomes an organizing tool among the growers themselves. Public justice, unfortunately, is not an organizing shop. It's something we could benefit from having in our lives, but what we saw in the case in Kentucky was the workers organized amongst themselves. They saw that they were, after several contracts, repeatedly getting caught up in the system and never breaking free. And that became a tool for them to kind of say, listen, I may be on the top today, but I'm going to be on the bottom, and this is worth changing. And indeed, I mean, you can see that perspective. I have actually not seen it, but just to make a reference to it, Super Size Me 2 just came out. And one of the growers they talked to is one of the growers in our Kentucky lawsuit, a guy by the name of Charles Morris. And so I think you'll get a good sense of his perspective on how he organized he was the leader of this group, from watching the video or hopefully watching the movie. I haven't even seen a preview, so I can't overpromise. I guess I'll throw this to Magaly because I think it's an interesting question. It seems to me that this sense of kind of being used up and captured is also what you hear from workers. And I know that there's some groups like Land Stewardship Project that are trying to bring farmers and people in the slaughterhouses together and trying to show the alliance. And have you had any luck in kind of bringing those workers together, kind of coming up with a cohesive coalition of farmers and the people kind of working in the plants?
Magaly, that's a question for you. Oh no.
Okay. Okay, I'm sorry. What was the question?
The question was, have you found any luck in getting farmers to team with workers in the slaughterhouses or with their staff that they have? They're not, the farmer actually is able to hire workers to support them on the farm, and so that you can get a kind of mutual kind of taking on a company that's captured people and using them up, or kind of are the workers standing on their own and the farmers are on the other side? Do you see a way to bring them together?
Yeah, I mean, here we haven't seen the growers or the farmers organizing with the workers, but it's certainly something that we are very interested in doing. That's how we are hoping with the GFPP campaign we can get more people in jumping into this, so we can all fight together. But yes, it's something that we are on the loop of seeing if we can organize with the farmers, and if you have any contact here that we can certainly be in contact with, please let us know, because yes, we are interested, because this is an issue that affects all these people, and they should unite.
Yeah, that's great. That's really helpful to think about the ways that farmers and workers can be organizing together. And I'm really glad that you all are in this conversation together with each other, because I think, from HEAL's perspective, we're thinking about how do we take that multi-sector approach and bring together the many different communities that are affected by these corporations. And so, if you both were to think about, where or how Tyson is most vulnerable, um, what would you say about where or how they're most vulnerable, and maybe who has the potential to have the most impact?
I defer to Magaly.
How is Tyson most vulnerable? Well, I think their image. They are very vulnerable to that, because the fact that they provide so much money to the community, it's because they want to see themselves as a good for the people, right? So whenever we had these rallies, we had their chaplains coming to us, telling us that they provide so much programs for the immigrants, for the Mashali's, and how we dare to talk bad about them because they are so good for the community. So definitely that is exposing them, and people, consumers, calling them to see what's going on and how they can improve that. It's definitely something that it worked for us. Like back in May, as I said, we had a lot of media attention, so they were on the loop of everyone. So I think that at least make them try to change their image and to come back and say we are willing to change, and just to recover all these consumers that they were really mad at them. So definitely is something that we know that they are very sensitive to. It's something that we can continue use.
Yeah, I think that makes a much better way than it was originally I had to say, but I think that's exactly right. These companies only seem to respond to monetary threats, and consumers are a way in which monetary threats can be really actualized. I think that's one of the reasons the GFPP campaign is so exciting. I just want to also underscore something else that Magaly said, which also responds to one of the questions in the chat. So the growers are not compensated more when they go antibiotic free. That is forced down on them from the company. And I think this goes to Magaly's point that we can't have a conversation about sustainability that's just about antibiotic free, or just about any specific small segment of the project. It has to be a cohesive conversation where certainly labor and certainly a variety of other concerns are added into it. But once you I think one of the things the companies have done very successfully is manipulate our own single issue campaigns against us. And, I certainly worry about that the more we kind of press those campaigns.
That's great. So if Tyson were the target of a negative PR campaign, how would that affect the efforts that you both are undertaking?
I'm sorry, Davina, I had trouble to
hearing me. Yeah. So for example, we've talked about which corporations to expose their bad practices and do negative public relations campaigns around them. So if Tyson were the target of a campaign like that, how would that either help or hinder the efforts that each of you are undertaking?
I will say for me that I think we want to be the help to those campaigns. Litigations typically are a confined universe, and we want to figure out a way so that we can make sure that our litigation is having a broader impact and can talk to you about your campaigns and how we can add that into the discussion. Sometimes a case will help, and we're happy to talk to people about whether a case helps a campaign in terms of getting publicity. But I also think, right, we very much recognize that this is going to be a policy change rather than a court order change in most instances, and certainly you're talking about industry-wide, and so we want to kind of find ways to be of assistance to you rather than vice versa.
Yeah, for us, it's about like the campaign should be worker-led, and so for us, it's very important to create a solid base of workers, and to kind of for them, because I know that we all have more privilege understanding what's going on, but they are the experts at the end. And whenever the company they can say I am wrong, but they cannot say to their own workers that they are wrong of what they say. So for us, it is very important to build the campaign on worker space, and so for them to be able to fight and negotiate what they want, and to always take into consideration the workers, because I cannot go to Tyson and try to negotiate something that I really don't know. I have never been in a processing plant. I don't know the real issues. I mean, it's not like that. So that's why we work a lot on leadership development for them to be able and to be strong enough to stand up for their rights.
That's great, thank you. And actually, given that we have just a few minutes left, I'll ask you, Magaly, first. What are some ways that people can get involved in or support the work that you all are doing in Arkansas?
Yeah, it's always good to share the information that we always expose to help us to spread the word. To also, as consumers, they can also put a lot of pressure with the companies to do better with the workers and the environment and animals and so on. We also, I mean, in the South, it's very difficult, and we struggle a lot often with money-wise. So it's always good for them to donate to the center, because the work that we do is very crucial for the communities and also the food system. And any way that we share petitions, if they can help to spread out those petitions, that will be great.
Great.
I think, picking up on Magaly's point about being worker driven, I think having a conversation, hearing what's going on the ground is so important for us. I find going out and speaking to the growers to be transformative in my perspective. The times I've been able to talk to workers, that certainly has been true as well. And, I'm not sure we'll always have a solution. And I saw the question in the comment box about, can we ever imagine Tyson paying for damages? So to be clear, there's a variety. Workers' comp is one system that makes our lives a little bit difficult in getting people meaningful damages. There have been environmental damages, like the nuisance suits that occurred in Missouri and are going on now in North Carolina, where neighbors have sued for damages. But we need to know what's going on the ground to figure out the right solution, figure out how we can work together. And so we're hearing from you and kind of contributing as we can to the conversations is most valuable to us. And to the extent you'll certainly never bother us by reaching out. I love being part of those conversations, because at the very least I learned something. I've never been in a slaughterhouse either, and so I need to understand the system that I'm trying to take on.
Great. Well, thank you both so much for joining us, and to everyone who participated in this webinar as well. If you want to find out more about the work that Dave or Magaly are doing, you'll see the links to their website on this slide, as well as their contact info, which they generously offered to get in touch with them. And this is hopefully just the beginning of a conversation and a dialogue that we'll all be having together around how we address this work and learning more about each other's work. HEAL definitely intends to hold more of these webinars and more conversations like this. And there are some good questions that have been asked, so we'll make sure to keep that going. if any of you missed this, some people were not able to join for the whole webinar, and some folks who registered did miss it. So we recorded this webinar, and we'll be sending that out as well as the PowerPoint presentation to folks. And if there are other particular organizations, groups, topics that you think we should be covering on these webinars, please be in touch as well about that. Thanks again, especially to David and Magaly for joining us, and all of you for being here and being part of this.
Thank you. Bye.